All right, so to get into the good content, I will pass it over to Greg Collins from IBPSA's California Advocacy Committee.
All right, thanks, Elise. So I'm here with Panos too. Panos, you want to speak up so maybe your video pops up for people?
Yeah, hi, everyone.
All right, thanks. So Panos and I started the advocacy committee within IBPSA USA probably 5 or 6 months ago now to have a more organized representation of energy modeling practitioners within everything California, obviously CalBEM being a major part of that. Our group and practice, we tend to focus more on larger, high-performing projects and utilize tools and workflows that work well for us. So a lot of our interest in CalBEM and everything else in California is on streamlining energy compliance in that step within our projects. So we've been, talking, brainstorming, and one thing led to another, and that kind of tied in well with CalBEM and Working Group 1 specifically. So then hence these two-part webinars. So the first webinar is recorded and available if anybody missed it. Had a really engaging discussion. So I'm hoping for more of that today. And then just thanks to everybody, especially the CEC, for being here and such an active participant and interested in these conversations, and hopefully identifying some actions that can help kind of make some changes. And thanks to 2050 Partners too for kind of grabbing a hold of this idea that we came up with, and then you did all the legwork. So we appreciate Elise and everybody. So yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. I'm going to transition us over into our presentation period, and we'll start with Will Vicent. Will is the manager of the Building Standards Office at the California Energy Commission, for those who don't know, and he's going to talk about the CEC Title 24 compliance process. I'll stop sharing to give Will a chance to share his screen, and speakers as you come up, and so Supriya and Neal Kruis, Working Group 1 co-chairs, will be next, and then Sally, Blair, and Goel Marver. So feel free to go ahead and start your slides when it's your time. And with that, over to you, Will.
Great, just get a quick confirmation that you guys are all seeing slides.
Looks good.
Okay, and I took hello everybody, I took a look at the attendee list, and I feel like I know or have worked with 9 out of 10 of you guys, so I'll try to keep it short and leave a lot of time at the end so we can have some of that rich conversation and informal dialogue, which I think is super beneficial. So last time at the last working group meeting, I think RJ from the Energy Commission did a great job at sort of teeing up, as well as Heidi from the CASE team, sort of the overall process of the energy code. And today I was going to touch on just a little bit more on the performance compliance path and why it's important and where we think there are opportunities ahead, which is the primary reason I'm interested in this discussion. I hope you all are as well. But first, worth saying, so the energy code and its associated tools, CBEC-COM and CBEC-RES, are the result of a gigantic team. So this is the Building Standards Office. You may be familiar with some of these names, and I'm listing this here for transparency. So hopefully you guys have had some level of interaction with these staff. But that's just the beginning. We sort of orchestrate and prioritize all the workload for California, but there's a number of state agencies that are involved in the energy code process, including tools. Some of the notable ones being the Public Utilities Commission, who oversee the investor-owned IOUs, and the Building Standards Commission, which is responsible for the overall building code itself. We work a little bit with the Department of Energy and are working more with Air Resource Board and Housing and Community Development. So that's all an acronym soup. And to continue on that path, there's just so many more. And even here, I'm missing a lot of company names and logos, but it just gives you a sense that this is California's energy code is the result of a network. It's not one entity or business or utility or anything. It really is a network that chooses to work together symbiotically to try to develop the best standards on behalf of Californians. Last week, we had a monstrous milestone. We had a business meeting, an California Energy Commission business meeting to adopt the 2022 Energy Code and its associated environmental impact report. So all staff was hands on deck the last couple of weeks. So I apologize to a couple on this call who we haven't been able to respond back to emails or provide full circle service. We'll get back to you. Last week was a huge lift, and we're catching up on emails. But that code was pretty monumental for the state of California and nationally, in so much it established heat pumps as the performance standards baselines for a lot of building types. So this is the starting point. It's actually harder to do natural gas in a lot of circumstances for the 2022 Energy Code. And the chair of the Energy Commission called it the most substantial energy code in our history because of the path that it sets us on. It was a lot of work from many people, many of which are on this call. It also includes solar plus storage baselines, which in its entirety, we predict will have a bigger capacity, megawatt hour impact in the state than even the 2019 residential standards. So that was pretty massive. These are modest solar and storage baselines for select non-residential buildings. Electric ready requirements, so it's easier to transition to electric in the future. And some of the other bread and butter stuff, including lighting provisions, multifamily restructuring. That was big to a lot of people. A lot of stakeholders appreciate that we have centralized and consolidated our multifamily provisions in the code. And what matters most to this group is that we will also be following suit in the software. So if you guys haven't heard already, we will be doing our best to move all multifamily and mixed use modeling into CBEC-COM. So that's underway, and we're excited about that. And then lastly, it includes some ventilation requirements. But that's just the highlight, so you guys can see where we're at in the process. That code that was adopted is anticipated to save nearly $10 million of metric tons, or not dollars, nearly 10 metric tons of CO2 equivalent, and have an estimated emissions benefit of $1.6 billion. The reason I'm using this slide is this gives a pretty good summary of the categories that were pursued in 2022, and heads up, a good peek at what will remain a priority in 2025. So take a look at the percentage totals there. So obviously heat pumps and batteries and PV are important, but some of the other areas that get less airtime, such as process loads, additions, and alterations, will continue to be a theme for 2025. Now, overall benefits of the Energy Code, this is where I want to sort of focus in on the performance path. So this is the historical GHG benefits of the Energy Code since 2005, the 2005 code. That green rectangle there on the right shows the impact, the emissions impact in California from the recently adopted Energy Code. But there's all these benefits. There's, utility bill savings, consumer protection. Energy efficiency has been identified by the state and many other agencies as the least cost way to meet our climate action goals. So the building code will continue to be really, really important. Of course, we talk a lot about load flexibility and leveraging a clean electrical grid. So the standards help us do that. But what doesn't get a lot of airtime, especially in the presentations and when people are talking about the Energy Code, is one of the reasons that California can push so aggressively. Many say that California's is the most aggressive or most progressive Energy Code in the nation. Part of the reason is because we have flexibility. We allow for people to make trade-offs on the baseline, and that speaks to the importance of the performance compliance path and software, which is what this topic is all about. So when I talked to Greg and Panos and others leading up to this, we wanted to get a finer point on what some of the sort of legislative or drivers and constraints were in California to get us a better sense of what we can and can't do with compliance software. And of course, it should come as no surprise that the largest driver there is the Warren-Alquist Act, which during the energy crisis established the CEC in 1974. This also provides a lot of detail on legislative direction. So it is a very, very powerful document, which we continue to use for overall guidance on what we have to do in the energy code. Yeah, even though it is massive and important, it is continually amended. So it's not just a static document. That's worth mentioning. I honestly don't know what it takes to amend the Warren-Alquist Act, but I do know that it can be done, and it was recently done in January of this year. So something to keep in mind. But in that Warren-Alquist Act, I thought it was interesting that it states that the performance path that we have in California is the basis, and that a prescriptive option is sort of the backup plan. And so we like to operate in putting emphasis on the performance path that allows for those trade-offs. Also in the Warren-Alquist Act is where it clearly states that we are required, the Energy Commission is required to publish a public domain computer program and associated certification process. So some of you may be aware of this, but notice it doesn't say open source. It doesn't say software. It doesn't say interface. It says specifically a computer program. And we're working with our legal to better understand what that means, but I just thought I would throw the language on here as a instigative talking point. And then it also says, Warren-Alquist says that we are required to approve, or we may approve non-public domain computer programs as alternatives. So these are in addition to the public domain computer program that we are required to publish. And that those ACMs, alternative calculation methods, must include documentation demonstrating compliance through our ACM approval manual. Those are the large drivers in the legislative regulatory space. But in addition to that, I'm understating this, but overall we have CEC leadership that sort of drives the vision. This is largely our commissioners here. The lead commissioner for the standards is Commissioner Andrew McAllister. We also have to weigh budgets and contracting mechanisms, and so this all sort of leads to the implementation complexity of this work as a real life driver to delivering the standards with the performance path. And some of the other things, some of the themes that we have heard, I should state that all of these items, these drivers on here, are meant to reflect the needs of the public. So it's not, Warren-Alquist is more important than the public. All these represent the best interest of the public. And with that, we've heard a lot about the interest in streamlining processes. I'm hyper aware of how large the energy modeling community and network is, and that energy compliance is just a small but important piece of that network. We've also heard a lot about the interest in national alignment, especially for firms that work outside of California, which makes all the sense in the world. And we've heard a lot of interest in people who really want to move the needle on climate change, that the standards have to have market relevance and have to tie into the real estate industry in one way or another. That's something that I'm particularly interested in. So these are some of the drivers. Opportunities, and this is sort of my last slide here, so we're wrapping up, is that I showed you that slide with all the staff there in the CEC and then our larger network. So I can share that everybody is really excited to collaborate and assess and bring up new ideas and infuse this topic with some totally far out there concepts. We're very open to humoring all of that and hope that the path for getting more public input in the process is by attending CalBEM and IBPSA webinars and collaborating with all of you a little bit more than we have in the past. We have a sort of top-down directive to make the standards a little bit more data informed, which I'm excited about. There are all these data sources in the state. These are just some of them. RAS and SUSE you may have heard of. IBPSA USA is working on some awesome market tell research, which I just got a peek of yesterday with Mike Wilson. So there's all these great resources out there for data, and we would like to use those data sources more to inform future CBEC Common, CBEC Res, or whatever it will be. And then lastly, I'll share with this group that We have been given support from senior leadership all the way up the chain in CEC to embark on a road mapping effort of sorts. So this means that CEC staff will help facilitate a process where we can think about not just, okay, how do we meet all the needs or as many of the needs as we can for 2022, but how do we provide the state with the best available service through 2025, 2028, and even 2031. So looking a little bit more forward so we can be a little bit more creative and less reactive. And there's one little creative piece which many of you have already seen. So here's some web resources, and I'll stop there, Elise.
Thanks so much, Will. That's great. Supriya and Neal, are you ready to take the mic, so to speak?
Yeah, you can do that. I'll share my screen. Okay. So as quite a few folks would know, Neal and I, we'd sent out a survey a few months back, actually the beginning of this year, to get some input on some of the performance-based approaches that you guys want to hear more about. We had a webinar in the beginning of January where we gave a quick overview of the different performance-based approaches, what challenges those are being developed to address, and Rahul presented on the history of the development of the performance-based path in California. And then we had a discussion around the advantages or limitations of the whole building performance-based approach that exists in California and how some of the other national efforts could address some of those challenges. And we followed up with a survey where we had just a short description of these different approaches, and we asked you all to give us input on which one do you want to hear more about. The basic purpose being that those would be some topics we potentially have more discussions on, have some webinars on, and could just develop some kind of inputs for just CEC or just California stakeholders in general, address some of the misconceptions and things like that. So to remind you guys, this was a survey. We had listed out the different options, the EUI target approach, the simplified performance rating method, the system performance approach, prescriptive packages, the Appendix G approach, which has a stable baseline. And then we also collected some input on any interest or the viability of third-party testing of performance-based projects instead of software certification. And we asked you to give some thoughts on what you thought about moving to more of a third-party testing, project-level testing approach. And there's an open-ended question on any topics of interest.
So, Supriya, just to clarify that this is third-party review of individual models is the idea there.
Right. Right. And you guys can see my screen, right? I forgot to ask that.
Yep.
Okay. So we got a total of 17 responses, and we've just put together all the responses we received. We're hoping that we want to share some of the key responses we got and also get some discussion going on what we want to do next with the level of interest and the different topics of interest within this group. So on the question on which of the performance paths would you like to discuss further within this working group, there was a lot of support for the stable baseline approach, which is the Appendix G approach in 90.1. And then also looking at a more simplified performance rating method approach. So this would be developing a whole building analysis compliance path, which is more simplified and potentially for even smaller, simple buildings. There was some interest in the EUI target approach, which Dimitri is working on with Big Ladder Software, and he also presented on that back in January. And then some interest in the system performance, the TSPR path, which Washington State has adopted, and prescriptive packages.
And Supriya, one thing to clarify here is that not all these options are mutually exclusive. You can combine some of them and potentially have multiple paths, or some of these could actually work within the same path together.
Right. Yeah, the code path is another discussion altogether. Like these are not necessarily full billing approach or just one exclusive path to comply with code. It could be built with other requirements. Like system performance could be built on top of prescriptive requirements, could also work as a backstop. Or similarly, there could be an envelope system performance, which could be a backstop to a whole building performance. So there are different ways this could be adopted. That's where a larger discussion would be required. And all of you should just feel free to chime in if you want clarification on something, or if you want to bring something up. The idea is to discuss this more. So any other inputs from you at any point are welcome. We also wanted to highlight some of the key comments we received. So on the topic of moving from certified software to third-party project review, there were some really interesting comments. One being that if LEED can do this, so can any state or municipality. It would require a review framework, reviewers like GBCI for LEED. And then there were also folks who pointed out that there are limitations in software. It doesn't necessarily allow a good representation of a project's design, and this third-party review process or the project testing approach would be more dynamic and would require more and would allow for more accurate modeling using different software tools. The biggest advantage being you could use any software tool with this third-party project review process. The con that was repeated a few times was the fact that the software test certification approach currently produces the same results, irrespective of which software is used. It prevents gaming or vendor shopping, and the infrastructure that California has is more advanced than any other state or jurisdiction in this country. This might be a sentiment that more folks share. Then on the different performance-based approaches or other different code formats, prescriptive packages received some support. And the biggest advantage of this approach is that it's really straightforward and it's a transparent thing. So you have package of measures, and you can either meet the code by a certain number of minimum points that each of these prescriptive approaches have. This is the energy credits path that Washington State has adopted. It has been proposed for standard 90.1. It's out for, I think it's still out for public review, or the public review process period might have closed. And this would address several challenges with the performance path. So basically, it eliminates the need for energy modeling, but it still gives you the benefit of an optimized design because the points are based on simulation results. The simplified performance path also received a lot of support, and some of the comments specific to this was it kind of added on to the advantages of the Appendix G approach. So if the simplified performance rating approach is developed in a way that there is a stable baseline and one model can be used for multiple purposes, then this is a good approach. There was this one comment which was very interesting. A simplified performance path should be available for simple projects which use ordinary systems and technologies, and it could relate to streamlining and simplifying the existing performance path, or done in conjunction with the exceptional performance path. We can get into this a little bit more in detail when we start talking about this approach. But yes, the idea is that this approach would only be available for a certain set of projects which meet specific criteria. So you don't want people to be going with this approach just because it is simple, but it doesn't necessarily represent your design well. So the biggest challenge with this is defining those constraints and making sure that it's only buildings that meet those specific constraints that use this, this approach. So this would be something operational based compliance. This was a part, this was not in our original list, but someone added this as another approach to consider. So determining compliance based on actual operational performance or similar to outcome-based codes. this was another thing that was mentioned. So I'll pause here and I'll see, Neal, do you have anything to add, or do we want to just have some kind of discussion right now?
Not a whole lot to add. Just want to kind of bring this together with, so we put this survey out. We coordinated pretty well with the CalBEM, or sorry, the IBPSA USA California Advocacy Group with Greg and Panos. And we have, there was some discussion of these ideas in that circle as well. And so the idea, what we're seeing today with the participation from the CEC is how well can these ideas be work within this current structure. And so, one thing that Will showed is that, the prescriptive option is necessary or required. So, and I don't know if that's kind of along the same lines as the prescriptive packages that Supriya showed. I think that's maybe a backstop behind that even. So anyway, so a lot to consider here. And yeah, the idea is to let's put our minds together and see what ideas might pass muster through the CEC process. So, and I don't know if we want to entertain a whole lot of discussion now. If there's clarification stuff, maybe we want to get to that. I see John's hand is up.
Hey, go ahead, John, if you have a question, something. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. In terms of the people you were interviewing, were these all California based folks, or was the net spread a little wider?
So this was a survey we sent out through CalBEM. So these were, I would say, these were mostly California folks.
Yeah. Okay. I should talk probably offline about what I see are a number of problems associated with Appendix G. I understand why it's valuable for ASHRAE 90.1, where you don't have the same level of software support as in California. But if you look at Appendix G, I think there's some key issues. They're essentially based on the assumption that your proposed model somewhat looks like the mix of measures that you would have in the prototypes, and basing the baseline on the 2004 ASHRAE, and my understanding is there is no intent on ever updating that baseline. So you're starting with the base. When you look at regressions or anything else, the further and further you get away from your initial starting point, the more and more error that you, add. So, given that the baseline is so old and our codes have moved pretty dramatically away from that baseline, I'm not seeing it as advantageous as our format in California, in that we update the standard every 3 years. And but I understand that this is probably not feasible for someone who is trying to enforce ASHRAE 90.1, where multiple states have different vintages that they've adopted, and so anyway, that's my comment.
Yeah, thanks, John. I think we can follow up on that topic. I think there's some good points in there during our discussion at the end here.
Okay. Yeah, Elise just pointed out that we can do clarification questions. Let's hold the discussion for the end. So if we don't have any other questions, let's see if there are any other hands up. Yeah, John, looks like you have a question.
Yeah, just a request or a recommendation. As I look at these different ideas, it would be great if the Energy Commission were willing to do it. If you go back to the first slide that listed all the different options, if they were at all willing to go through and put a 1 through 10 score on these related to how much, just frankly, headache they foresee in trying to move one of these forward. So we could see if there's any correlation between things that are an easy lift on the Energy Commission's part and also desired by the design community, because those are sort of two different important rankings. That would help, I don't know, consolidate it a bit. Could be, it's a wild guess on the part of the Energy Commission, to be sure, but I'm sure they've got a pretty informed opinion there.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah, that's a very good point. You might send Will home with some homework.
Please do. Yeah, and I'm not the only one from the Energy Commission here, so yeah, it's our job to hear the interests and for us to assess fairly. Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Then I guess, yeah, should we move on to the next presentation?
Sounds fabulous. Oh, go ahead.
Looking at heavy lift, I don't think we know particularly directly what the heavy lift is. I guess, you know, I think this is a good start, but trying to figure out what stable baseline do you use, and kind of going through John McHugh's issues. I don't know how well the commission can prioritize that list. I think all those they're good ideas, but well, I'll talk with Shay, RJ, Haley, and Will and see where we land on it.
Most excellent. Over to Jill and Sally then.
Thank you. Can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Looking great.
Awesome. So this is Sally with NORESCO. Hey, everybody. Jill is actually moving her son into college campus today, so she's not going to be able to join us. But she is normally on these CalBEM Working Group 1 calls. So I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about the plans examiner. I know I often bring up the plans examiner. I kind of feel like the Lorax, where I'm speaking for the plans examiner in these discussions. But as we evaluate these different compliance options and paths for performance, it's going to be really important that we also consider the needs of the plans examiner. So I wanted to start with who Energy Code 8 is. I'm hoping you all have heard of it, but not everybody knows who supports it. It's administered by the Statewide Codes and Standards Program, which is an IOU program, and specifically by the Compliance Improvement Subprogram, which is run by SDG&E, SoCal Edison, and PG&E. And we work really closely with the California Energy Commission and collaborate to make sure that the efforts are supporting one another and not duplicating. And the mission of Energy Code 8 and compliance improvement is really to realize the savings intended by the code. So Will put up the stats earlier. You know, the 2022 standards are intended to save 10 metric tons of CO2 equivalent and $1.5 billion. And so the mission of the Energy Code 8 work is to realize those savings in buildings. The way we do this and the way we approach our work is to collaborate with all the different market actors who have to participate in the compliance process. And there are a lot of people, a lot of different roles on any given building project that have to do their specific tasks in the compliance process for us to realize those savings. So the Energy Code 8 team supports Title 24, Part 6, and also Title 20, Appliance Efficiency. So the market actors on the left are really related to Title 20, and the market actors on the right are related to Title 24, Part 6. As far as software goes, there are 3 of these market actors that are really impacted by the compliance software and how it works. I think we've got a lot of energy modelers on the phone, so I won't go through the energy modeler and designer roles. I feel like you guys are really familiar with those. And again, I want to spend a little more time on the role of the plans examiner. So when we work with the different market actors in the compliance process, we really do a lot of listening. So we collaborate, we train these folks, we do focus groups, we have individual relationships across the state of California with all these different roles, and we listen to them and we hear about where they're struggling with the tasks that they need to complete in the compliance process. And so these are the tasks for the energy modelers and designers. And one of the most critical roles in the compliance process is the plans examiner. The reason is because the plans examiner is the person who is making sure the construction documents, so the plans and specs, are compliant with the energy code. And as we all know, the subcontractors and general contractors are bidding off the construction documents, and they're building off the construction documents. So we may have the most perfect model, the most accurate model, and the software is super capable to enable that accurate model. But if that model and the energy features that are reflected in the model don't make it into the plans and specs, it's not going to be built that way in the field. And the plans examiner is the role in the compliance process to make sure that translation happens and it ends up in the plans and specs. So it's super, super critical. In California, there are a few features that are in the current compliance software that really help the plans examiner. So we talked last time about, plans examiners really do not have the expertise, nor do they have the time to QC a model. And, honestly, I don't really see in the vast majority of jurisdictions, that ever being the case. So the approach we've taken in California is to really automate a lot of the QC process and a lot of the, checking the modeling process for the plans examiner. So one of the ways we've done that is that the modeling software generates the appropriate baseline per what the CEC wants the baseline to be. So the CEC defines what the baseline is going to be, and the modeling software applies that to the project. So what that means for the plans examiners, they don't have to know or keep up with every code cycle what the appropriate baseline is for that specific project. And also, one of the huge advantages in California is the baseline does not even have to be included on the compliance form. So the plans examiner does not have to spend time at all checking the baseline, because that's automatically done in the software. The second thing is the software applies the rule set per the ACM. So again, when we train plans examiners, we're training them on understanding high level how performance path works, what the software is capable of, what the software is not capable of that they need to be looking for. So if we don't have to train the plans examiners to really deeply understand how to apply the performance requirements to a project scope, that's a huge advantage for them, because they really just don't have the skill set to understand that. So we're automating it in the software. And then the last thing that's a huge advantage for the plan examiner in California is that there's a statewide compliance form. So the NRCC perf and the CF1R perf on the residential side are generated by any compliance software. That means every time the plans examiner sees a performance path for any scope on the project, they're seeing the same form over and over again. So they get used to seeing that form. And then the other real advantage here for both Energy Code ACE and for the CEC, who provides training to jurisdictions across the state, is that we can develop one set of checklists and one training that helps them compare that compliance form to the drawings and specs. And then we go out and we do that training in 580 jurisdictions across the state. So the scalability that having that same consistent form across the state allows us really saves a lot of time and money for those who are trying to help the plans examiners complete their tasks. So the idea here is, as we talk about these different approaches, which I'm all about, increasing flexibility and helping modelers be successful, we also need to consider, as we're talking about this, the plans examiners as well, and how we're going to enable the plans examiners to do that check of the drawings and specs. What can we automate for them? Keep our expectations of them realistic, so that they can be successful in making sure the construction documents reflect all the energy features that we need to realize the savings of the standards. So I'm on these calls every once in a while. I speak up and say, hey, what about the plans examiner? And I'll continue to do that. And Jill and I really want to be a resource and participate in this group to bring that perspective to the different solutions. So thanks you guys for your time.